It started with a single terrifying headline: Russia moves where the world drew a red line. As dawn broke across Europe, diplomats scrambled, financial markets stuttered, and ordinary people woke to a new kind of uncertainty. Overnight, a tense standoff erupted into something wholly unexpected: a Russian action so bold that even the most seasoned analysts were left speechless. Suddenly, the old assumptions about how far Moscow might go felt obsolete. Official statements poured in, each one laced with anxiety. European leaders called emergency summits, military commands went to heightened alert, and ordinary citizens found themselves glued to their screens. The unthinkable had just happened, and it sent shockwaves through capitals from Warsaw to Paris, igniting a fresh wave of fear that crossed borders as swiftly as any tank column. The numbers alone spoke volumes. Energy prices spiked by double digits, social media exploded with speculation, and global news tickers abandoned routine updates for rolling coverage of a potential turning point in modern history. Yet the true impact was deeper: a sense that some invisible threshold had just been crossed, thrusting Europe into a new era where deterrence felt suddenly fragile and old rules no longer applied. What Russia unleashed wasn't just a breach of precedent. It was a stark warning to all. As Europe recalibrates, one question reverberates everywhere: has the world just witnessed the moment when the stakes changed forever? And if so, what comes next may be far more dangerous than anyone dares to imagine. Only a generation ago, optimism flourished across Europe's capitals. The Iron Curtain had fallen, and leaders dreamed aloud of a continent whole and free, anchored by growing trade and open dialogue with a changing Russia. The scars of the Cold War seemed to be healing as Western investment poured into Moscow, and promises of mutual prosperity echoed from Berlin to St. Petersburg. But beneath this hope, a quieter resentment simmered, one rooted in unaddressed grievances, bruised pride, and unresolved questions of power. The relationship began to sour as NATO expanded eastward, welcoming former Soviet states, moves hailed by some as progress but viewed in Russia as an encroachment, a slow tightening of the West's grip. Mistrust deepened with each military exercise near Russia's borders and every sanction imposed after Moscow's actions in places like Georgia and Crimea. Energy ties, once symbols of cooperation, turned into levers of control. By the 2010s, instead of partnership, Europe and Russia found themselves circling each other with suspicion, bracing for the next crisis lurking beneath global headlines. What unfolded wasn't open war, but something more insidious: cyber attacks, disinformation, covert operations, pressure campaigns, hallmarks of hybrid confrontation. The old certainty of armies and treaties gave way to an unpredictable battlefield, where lines were blurred and escalation could happen in a dozen invisible ways. That's what makes this latest move so significant. Unlike the slow-boiling tensions of the past, this time Russia crossed a line everyone assumed would remain untouched. It's not another piece in a long chess game, it's a shattering of the board itself. This forced Europe to confront a truth it tried hard to avoid. The risks are no longer hypothetical, and the margin for error has all but vanished. This isn't just a flare-up. It's the unsettling start of a new era. The world watched, stunned, as Russia did the impossible, deploying advanced missile batteries and armored divisions beyond the agreed buffer zone, territories considered untouchable since the Cold War's end. Live feeds captured convoys streaming through freshly breached borders. Seismic sensors picked up bursts of ground movement. Satellite images revealed hastily erected command posts in areas once thought safely out of Moscow's reach. For years, European leaders reassured their citizens that certain lines could never be crossed without triggering global outrage or unified response. Now, those very lines smoldered in real time. This wasn't just a military maneuver. Alongside troops, a torrent of cyber attacks ripped through government networks across the continent. Banking systems hiccuped under coordinated malware assaults. Airport security protocols flickered. Energy grid operators fought to keep critical infrastructure online. The multi-pronged strategy, military pressure combined with digital warfare, sent a clear message. Russia could strike at Europe's physical and virtual heartlands all at once, and the old playbook for response no longer applied. Yet official statements, desperately measured, played down the full scale of risk. Politicians chose their words with surgical caution, refusing to admit just how rattled they felt. Phrases like "situation under control" and "dialogue remains open" rang hollow. Emergency meetings stretched through the night, and markets hemorrhaged billions in mere hours. News cycles featured maps and analysts, but often glossed over the unprecedented nature of what just happened. Behind closed doors, however, the whispers told a different story. Intelligence chiefs briefed lawmakers on the likelihood of further incursions. Economic ministers calculated worst-case energy shortages. NATO commanders scrambled to reposition forces along the alliance's eastern flank. Across Europe, private anxieties mounted as citizens sensed that something vital had shifted underfoot. Paranoia ruled, trust fractured, and Putin faced his greatest test not just on the battlefield, but within the shadows of his own court. News of the killing reverberated through Russia unlike any single battlefield loss before. For weeks, the Kremlin had assured citizens that the war's architects were invincible, untouchable. Suddenly, that illusion shattered. In major cities, people gathered in hushed clusters at metro stations, whispering about what Ukraine might do next and whether Moscow's fortress of security had finally cracked. Telegram channels buzzed with rumors from regional uprisings and elite infighting, two wild tales of double agents and betrayal. On state media, anchors struggled to spin the news as a minor setback, but the public felt the tremors. Supermarkets saw brief runs on essentials, while currency markets jerked as nervous investors transferred funds out of the country. Banks fielded a spike in anxious calls, with rumors swirling about sudden new restrictions or hidden shocks to come. The uncertainty was contagious. Even those loyal to the Kremlin felt a prickle of unease. Among Russia's elite, the message was chilling. If one of Putin's most protected enforcers could fall, no position felt safe. Some oligarchs reportedly considered sending families abroad or shifting assets offshore, seeing the writing on the wall. Generals and regional governors began tightening their own security or quietly sounding out potential allies just in case the political winds shifted again. Meanwhile, in restive regions, anger and opportunity merged. Local opposition figures saw an opening, using the shock to rally supporters and question Moscow's narrative. Police cracked down with more force, but whispers of protest spread faster than censors could react. Personal stories poured in, frontline soldiers texting, if they can reach him, they can reach anyone, and mothers in distant villages wondering aloud if their sons were now in greater danger. Across the nation, a sense spread that the old rules had changed overnight and nobody, from the president's circle to ordinary citizens, could guess what the next day might bring. The countdown has begun, and for Putin, every hour now matters. In the aftermath of the takedown, he faces a rapidly closing window to demonstrate control both to Russia's elites and to a nervous public. Within days, he must recalibrate military strategy, reassert loyalty among commanders, and project an image of strength at home and abroad. Allied leaders are already watching his next move, timing their own countermeasures with each signal out of Moscow. A pivotal international summit is less than a week away. If Putin hesitates, he risks appearing weak on the global stage, inviting more brazen moves from Kyiv and emboldening Western backers. Yet any escalation, be it new strikes in Ukraine, targeted arrests at home, or military posturing near NATO borders, carries the risk of spiraling the crisis out of control. Every calculated response is haunted by uncertainty. Will it reinforce stability or unleash consequences that erode Putin's remaining authority? Intelligence agencies sift through fresh cables and satellite feeds, racing to spot clues about retaliatory plans. There are whispers of elite purges, rapid deployments, and even possible attempts to change the narrative with dramatic wins abroad. But none of these options can erase the shock delivered by Ukraine's operation, and none guarantee the loyalty of Kremlin insiders rattled by the sudden loss. Meanwhile, key anniversaries and national holidays loom, a volatile mix of patriotic rallies and public anxiety. If the Kremlin fails to restore confidence by then, it may see protests or power plays accelerate, putting pressure on the regime unlike anything since the war began. The real countdown isn't only about military moves. It's about optics, timing, and seizing initiative before events slip out of Moscow's hands. For Putin, the next days are not just about survival, they're a race against time, with the fate of his regime teetering on his every decision. The shockwave from Ukraine's audacious strike spreads rapidly across continents, reshaping the world's response to the conflict. NATO's top brass moves swiftly, convening emergency sessions to adjust defensive postures and intelligence sharing. Eastern European countries, now convinced that old assumptions about Russian invulnerability are shattered, accelerate their own rearmament and urge for faster integration of Ukraine into Western security frameworks. For Washington and Brussels, the operation is both a warning and an opportunity, proof that effective resistance can change the tide, but also a red flag that escalation is no longer theoretical. Energy markets shudder as new risks emerge. Russia's grip over key supply routes is suddenly less certain, with speculation swirling about sabotage, sanctions retaliation, or supply cuts meant to punish Ukraine's allies. European leaders rush to secure alternative sources, fearing the Kremlin might lash out economically if military options seem too risky, as prices fluctuate. Some big energy players profit, but vulnerable economies face the threat of blackouts or inflationary spirals. Morale, meanwhile, diverges sharply. Ukrainian forces and supporters experience a surge of hope. Their narrative shifts from grim defense to bold, proactive deterrence. The victory sparks rallies, aid surges, and a wave of foreign volunteers. Conversely, Russian morale dips not just among troops but also among civilian supporters who question the state's ability to protect its own architects of war. Major players outside the immediate region respond in complex ways. China weighs its strategic bets, publicly calling for restraint but privately calculating whether a weakened Kremlin creates room for greater leverage in Eurasia. Other powers, seeing an opening amid the turmoil, position themselves to gain in regional diplomacy or energy sales. Unexpected winners and losers emerge. Arms manufacturers, intelligence contractors, and agile economies seize new gains. Authoritarian regimes reliant on Russia's strength reassess old alliances. The real impact is cumulative. This single operation, far from isolated, ignites domino effects that touch every corner of the geopolitical chessboard, proving that the repercussions of war can never be contained to one battlefield. The path forward is anything but clear, and every scenario carries danger for both Moscow and the wider world. One possibility is a fierce Kremlin crackdown. Putin may double down, launching sweeping purges within his inner circle while unleashing harsher security measures on the streets. Mass arrests, media blackouts, and show of force. Actions could follow dramatic, but risking backlash from weary, anxious citizens and elites who already sense the tide turning. Alternatively, some insiders whisper about a brokered exit, a negotiation aimed at freezing the conflict or deflecting attention from domestic instability. But in a climate of mistrust, any hint of compromise might spark new power rivalries, inviting more unrest at the top and below. There's also the specter of open power struggle. As fear and suspicion deepen, ambitious rivals could test Putin's control, leading to chaotic shifts reminiscent of Soviet-era coups. This scenario makes the situation volatile and unpredictable, with ripple effects beyond Russia's borders. Of course, the most alarming prospect is outright escalation. That could mean unpredictable missile strikes, escalation into new theaters, or asymmetric attacks on Western interests. With lines blurred and nerves frayed, accidental or intentional confrontation could escalate further than anyone intended, pushing NATO and the world into uncharted territory. Experts warn that none of these outcomes offers safety or closure. Each path brings fresh risks, shifting alliances, and new questions about how far the war might go before a true turning point is reached. No script is set, and every day adds a new layer of uncertainty. One thing is certain: whatever Putin and his rivals decide next will define the fate of this conflict, and the world will be watching, guessing, and bracing for what could happen when the next domino falls. Is this the moment the war takes a decisive turn, or have we simply unlocked a new phase of chaos and unpredictability? The removal of Putin's most feared enforcer could mark the beginning of profound change, exposing weakness at the very top and opening pathways for peace, justice, or upheaval. But with every bold action comes an equal risk that power vacuums draw in new dangers, destabilize old certainties, and tempt desperate leaders into even more reckless responses. Across the world, analysts and citizens alike debate whether Ukraine's daring move marks the point where fear begins to tip in the other direction, or if it's merely a spark, igniting an uncontrollable blaze of retaliation and surprise. Will this become the event historians call the great turning point, or will it be remembered as the instant the war plunged deeper into darkness with no end in sight? For now, the answer remains open, the danger unresolved, and the world's eyes fixed on what happens next. The stakes have never been higher, not just for Russia and Ukraine, but for global stability and the future of conflict everywhere. As the crisis enters this unpredictable new phase, every decision and reaction could shape history. Don't miss critical updates as they unfold. Subscribe now and join us as we track every twist in this rapidly evolving story. Stay informed, stay prepared, and be ready for what comes next.